He paid $340 for a .357 Magnum revolver because the guy behind the counter told him the .38 Special was for old men and paperweights. 8 months later, standing in a dark hallway at 2 in the morning, that same Magnum round nearly cost him his eyesight. The .357 Magnum was built in 1935 to kill the .38 Special. 90 years later, the .38 still outsells it in nearly every category that matters. That should tell you something. But what it tells you depends on which question you're actually asking, and most guys standing at that glass counter are asking the wrong one. Which one hits harder? The .357. Not a debate. Full power loads run past 1,200 feet per second, almost double the energy of a .38 Special plus P. If raw power is the only question, this is a 3-minute video. It's not the only question. There's a mechanical problem hiding inside every short-barreled .357 that never makes it onto the box. One that can cost you your night vision in the exact second you need it most, and the fix is already sitting in your hand. It costs you nothing. Elmer Keith spent years pushing Smith & Wesson to build something the .38 Special could never be. More case, more pressure, more penetration on a big animal or a determined man. In 1935, they gave him the .357 Magnum, and for a while it did exactly what he wanted. It became the round state troopers carried when they needed to shoot through a car door. It became the round that convinced hunters a revolver could take a deer. The numbers back that reputation. Standard .38. Special leaves the barrel around 800 to 850 feet per second. Step up to .38 Special plus P, and you're pushing 900, maybe a touch more. A full-power .357 Magnum defensive load, the real ceiling. Not. The watered-down stuff clears 1,200 feet per second and dumps close to double the energy into whatever it hits. That's not a marketing line. That's a chronograph reading. So the guy at the counter isn't lying when he says the .357 hits harder. It does. And if you've never fired one, the recoil feels like proof, a hard, fast jolt that convinces you something serious just happened downrange. That's the whole pitch. More pressure, more velocity, more confidence walking out the door. Nobody mentions what you're going to pay for that velocity every single time you pull the trigger in practice. We'll get back to that. Here's the first crack in the pitch. Magnum pressure was engineered around a 4-inch barrel, enough length to actually finish burning the powder before the bullet leaves. Most .357 revolvers sold for personal defense today aren't 4-inch barrels. They're 2-inch and 3-inch snub-nose guns, bought specifically because they're light enough to ride on a belt or sit in a nightstand drawer. The Magnum was built for a barrel most owners don't actually carry. Ask the average buyer why he chose a .357 and he'll usually repeat something he heard, not something he tested. FBI standards. A cop shop he saw once. A father-in-law who swore by Magnums because that's what the department issued back in 1975. None of that's wrong. Exactly. It's just half the story built on full-size service guns, fired by trained hands in daylight qualification courses. Not the 2-inch revolver going off in a dark hallway at 2 in the morning. That doesn't kill the .357's advantage. Not yet. But it means the number on the ammo box and the performance you actually get out of the gun you own are two different conversations. Almost nobody explains the difference before you pay for the gun. Here's where the advice from the gun counter stops helping. Every real defensive shooting that's actually been studied, not the fantasy of one clean shot, but the ones that happened, comes down to more than one trigger pull. Multiple rounds, multiple seconds, and a lot of what decides those isn't energy per shot. It's how fast you get the sights back where they need to be and fire again. Here's the physics nobody puts in the pitch. A lightweight 2-inch revolver weighs a fraction of what a full-size service revolver weighs. And recoil is simple math. Less mass to soak up the same energy means more of that energy goes straight into your hand and your wrist instead of the frame. Fire full-power .357 loads out of that small a gun, and the muzzle doesn't just kick, it climbs hard every single time. Defensive shooting instructors who train revolver shooters see the same pattern over and over. Students firing full .357 loads out of snub-nose guns take noticeably longer to settle the sights and fire again than the same students shooting .38 Special plus P out of the identical gun. The stronger round, fired once, sounds impressive. The weaker round, fired twice, accurately, is the one that's shown up again and again in real defensive shootings as what actually stops the threat, because shot placement, not energy, is the factor that keeps deciding the outcome, case after case. That's a real reversal. But it's not the one that should change your mind tonight. This is follow the powder. Magnum pressure north of 35,000. PSI is calibrated to fully burn inside a barrel with enough length to let it happen. 4 inches, 6 inches, cut that barrel down to 2 inches, and the powder doesn't finish burning before the bullet's already gone. What's left ignites the instant it hits open air, right at the muzzle and the gap in front of the cylinder. That's not a small spark. That's unburned powder igniting right in front of your face, in a visible burst of flame most owners have never seen because they've never fired full-power 357 loads, indoors, in the dark, the one time it would actually matter. Now put that in the room where it actually matters. A hallway. 2 in the morning. Lights off, because the lights are always off. You fire once. For the next handful of seconds, the exact seconds you need to reacquire a target, check a doorway, confirm who's still standing, your night vision takes a real hit. Not dim. Disrupted, right when you can least afford it. Nobody selling you the Magnum upgrade puts that line in the pitch. Some of you are already thinking it. A weapon-mounted light fixes this. It doesn't. Not fully. That fireball blooms right in front of the lens, washing the beam out the same way your headlights bloom back at you driving through fog. You get light. You don't get clean vision. And a full-size 6-inch end frame does burn cleaner. That's true. And worth knowing if that's the gun you actually own. But that's not the gun most guys carrying a 357 for personal protection actually bought. They bought the light one, the one that fits a holster instead of a range bag. 38 Special, especially standard pressure, was never loaded hot enough to need that much barrel to finish burning. Fired from that same 2-inch snub, it produces dramatically less muzzle flash, a difference anyone who's put both through the identical gun in a dark room notices immediately. The round with the smaller number on the box is the round that lets you keep your vision clear when it counts. That's the mechanical problem the box doesn't print. And it's the reason a home defense revolver bought purely for Magnum stopping power can turn against the man holding it the first time he actually needs it in the dark, in his own hallway, exactly like it's supposed to be used. Clears throat. If you're tired of buying a gun off a spec sheet and finding out the hard part was never on that spec sheet, that's what we test here. Subscribe, because the next one might already be sitting in your safe. None of that means sell the 357. It means know exactly what job it's for. Take that same Magnum out of the hallway and put it on your hip in the woods. Hard cast, flat nose, 357 loads, the heavy stuff built for penetration, not expansion drive, through thick muscle and heavy bone, deeper than 38 Special was ever built to reach. A mountain lion, a hog that won't go down on the first hit. A dog that's decided your fence line is a suggestion. That's a fight measured in penetration, not muzzle flash. Outdoors, in daylight, with room to recover from recoil between shots. The 357's extra energy stops being a liability and becomes the entire reason you're carrying a revolver instead of a smaller pistol. Out there, the conversation's over. The 357 wins. Full stop. Here's the part almost nobody at the counter tells you, because it doesn't require you to buy anything new. Heavy, hard cast, 38 Special plus P, loads the 158 grain stuff from the serious ammo makers, not the bulk. Practice box off the shelf. Close a real chunk of that penetration gap. Not all of it, but enough that for personal defense specifically, you're not actually choosing between weak and strong anymore. You're choosing between controllable and adequate and maximum and blinding. And that upgrade doesn't cost a gunsmith, a spring change, or a new barrel. Same cylinder, you just load it differently depending on the job in front of you. Which brings up the number that conversation always skips. How long has 38 Special been in continuous production? Since 1898. Longer than the 357 Magnum. Longer than the 45 ACP. Longer than almost anything else on that shelf. Every ammo maker loads it. Every gun shop stocks it. During the shortages that emptied shelves across this country, .38 Special was one of the first calibers back in stock, because the manufacturing infrastructure behind it never had a reason to shrink. And it's cheaper every time you pull the trigger, often by half, sometimes more, compared to a real full-power .357 defensive round. That's not a small line item. That's the difference between a man who puts 200 rounds a year through his carry gun and one who puts 2,000 rounds, because he can actually afford to. The gun you don't practice with is the gun you don't trust when your hands are shaking. Cost isn't a side note here. It's the reason half the guys who bought the .357 for serious defense have fired it exactly twice since the day they bought it. There's a mechanical cost too. Run high round counts of full-power .357 loads through a lightweight revolver, and you're accelerating wear on the forcing cone and stressing the top strap reel. Damage. Expensive to fix, slow to source parts for, on a gun that's supposed to be ready every single day. .38 Special doesn't put that same stress on the gun, shot after shot, year after year. You bought a gun engineered to be shot for decades. Feeding it a steady diet of its hottest possible load quietly shortens that. Here's the move that makes this whole argument academic instead of a real trade-off. Every .357 Magnum revolver ever made already fires .38 Special. Same cylinder, no swap, no tool, no trip to a gunsmith. Load .38, Special Standard or Plus P, for practice, for carry, for the nightstand, where controllable follow-up shots and a clean muzzle flash actually decide the outcome. Load .357 when you're heading into terrain where deep penetration on something big is the real threat you're planning for. One gun, two rolls. The decision happens at your ammo shelf, not at the gun counter. So here's the verdict, plainly. The .357 Magnum is the better woods gun, and it isn't close full-power hard-cast loads for a threat that needs to go through bone. The .38 Special is the better everything-else gun. Faster follow-up shots. No fireball stealing your night vision in your own hallway. Cheaper to shoot enough to actually stay sharp. Easier on the gun over a lifetime of practice. And it lives in the same revolver you already own. Keith gave the .357 more velocity and more penetration. What he never gave it was a follow-up shot as fast, a muzzle flash as tame, or a training round as cheap. The round built to replace the .38 Special still hasn't. Go back to that guy in the hallway. He didn't do anything wrong pulling the trigger. He did something wrong 8 months earlier, standing at a glass counter, buying stopping power nobody told him, came with a blind spot. That's the real dark side of the .357 Magnum. Not the recoil, not the price of the ammo. The fact that the rounds sold to make you safer can take your clear vision away for the exact seconds a home invasion actually happens in. You don't need to sell the gun, you need to load it on purpose. Full power .357 for the truck, the pack, the woods. Standard or Plus P .38, Special for the nightstand and the range, where you're actually pulling that trigger more than once a year. Same revolver, two different jobs, and now you know which ammo belongs in which one. If you carry a .38 or you're trying to decide between one and a .357, go watch our breakdown on .38 Special versus .380 ACP next. That one exposes a lie that's costing carriers even more than a bright muzzle flash.